Morning, everybody. Morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming to the Yeo Valley tent for the Yeo Valley talk, the first talk of the day, on the first day of Groundswell. No pressure whatsoever. We came to Groundswell last year, me and a couple of colleagues for the first time, and were kind of blown away by not just the sort of knowledge and the machinery and things like that, but the feeling of the place, of how this seems to be the meeting point of all the excitement that's going on in the field at the moment. And we thought, if Kellogg's can sponsor a tent, we can sponsor a tent. And when we sponsored a tent, they said, do you want to do a talk? And we said yes. And then we thought, what should we talk about? So, and also I can tell you that when you sponsor a tent, you don't get to decide who speaks in it, as you'll see at 12 o'clock today in this very special, very tent. So we're going to talk about our regen farming project. First, we'll introduce ourselves, though. So my name's Tom White, and I'm the project manager for our Regen Organic Farming Project, which is where we try to expand our knowledge and kind of understanding of the fields around regen farming, how it relates to organic livestock agriculture in the UK, and what we'd like to see out of it. But I'll let the rest of the panel introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Becky Willson, and I'm the technical director at the Farm Carbon Toolkit. And we've been involved with this project very much in terms of digging the holes, taking the samples, and I'm really looking forward to telling you what we found in a minute.
Hello, I'm Sophie Gregory, and I farm with my husband Tom Gregory, and we're involved in the project as one of the farmers. We farm organically on the Dorset-Devon border.
I think that covers me as well.
Not me. I'm Clare Hill, Regen Ag Director for FAI Farms, and I work with Arla and consequently Yeo Valley on, and Tom and Sophie are one set of farmers as part of the Arla Regen pilot programme, and so we're kind of all combined on everything regen.
Thank you. Right, I'm just going to briefly try and explain how we got here. So at Yeo Valley, we've been farming organically for 20 plus years on our farms in Somerset, but we also receive milk into our brand from probably more than 100 organic dairy farms in mostly the southwest UK, but actually throughout the country. And they come both from the OMSCO and the Arla milk pools. So about 4 years ago, we started to pick up the buzz around regen, to think about how it related to our brand and to our farming, to what we'd been doing, and to try and understand a bit more about how it impacts the sustainability of dairy production and how we can talk to consumers about our products and things like that. So we started firstly by looking in a very in-depth way into the soils on our own 2,000-acre estate in North Somerset. And it was at that time that through Liz Bowles, actually at the Soil Association, we met Becky, who had kicked off the Farm Carbon Toolkit work in the southwest a few years before. And so we took about 1,300 soil samples from our 2,000 acres to get a really, really clear idea of what was going on, particularly with carbon in our soils. We also looked at baselining biodiversity at that time. But the soil carbon work came back and was kind of so enlightening because of the huge variation that it showed and the huge scale of the carbon that we were holding in our soils. And at the same time as that, I guess, we were looking at carbon footprint of our brand, which is quite large, and trying to work out how the two ever came together. And it turns out, unfortunately for the marketing guys and the kind of corporate sustainability people, that at the moment you can't really put the two things together. At the moment, carbon footprinting of products and businesses doesn't incorporate soil carbon in any way, really. And we felt that this left a massive area kind of out of scope that was really very important. So we've done work over the last few years to really understand our carbon footprint and to really understand what's going on with the carbon in our soils. And the carbon footprint of a very large brand like ours, it turns out, largely sits with the farms. About 75% of it sits with the farms and about 9% with the consumer. So the part that we can actually affect as a brand is really quite small. But this is alongside this huge area of exploding interest and excitement around soil carbon and how we can actually do something about it. I'm forgetting my slides. So having looked at our soil carbon results and the huge variation across land area, which is managed quite similarly with quite similar soil types, kind of gave us the inspiration, the hope, the art of the possible kind of idea that we can affect it positively, and that there might be a very large opportunity there to create an amazing farming story. And the Farm Carbon Toolkit are helping us to do that. So we rolled that project out to 25 of our supplier farms. Tom and Sophie are one of them. And really we thought within this talk what we would touch upon was the results of the first phase of that work, what the quite interesting things that Becky has pulled out of having done more than 500 fields worth of soil sampling. I don't know how many tons of soil. But to touch upon that, and then also to touch upon the fact that this is not really just a measuring project. We don't want to wait 5 years to see what the outcomes are. When you look at these things, we have almost weekly discussions on what regen means, how you define it, what the definition is, all of these kind of things. But what we want to do, as well as measuring and understanding the kind of good that's been done, that we know has been done on organic soils over the last 20 or 40 years, we want to start the actions now, the new practices and things which we think might help to tip the dial even further into carbon drawdown. And, restoration of biodiversity and all of the other outputs that we want to get from this regen journey. And so Sophie and Tom are going to talk a little bit about some farm practice and how they are very bravely trying to do everything at once. And Claire's going to talk a bit about how farmers can look at their soil and the regen journey, I think. But within our own farms, we are also starting some trial work. So we have sampled our soils and got a pretty good idea of what's going on down there off the back of 20 years of organic farming. But if you look around the world, despite all the uncertainty, there are certain themes, and you'll probably come across them repeatedly at Groundswell, which come to the fore again and again as things which we think can help with soil health, soil resilience, and soil carbon at the end of the day. And those are mob grazing, composting and addition of organic matter, growing diversity, and agroforestry, which is a particular interest to us at Yeo Valley. So we are running trials of all of these things on our farms, and I really want to just put a flag in the ground with this talk to say if there is anyone else around who wants to make contact to talk about these topics, who's already trialling something or who's interested in measuring the outputs, then please come and see us, speak to us. We're very keen that this is a collaborative project. And with that in mind, we've developed a website that we've put online. Is sort of soft launch. We're building content as we go, but there's a bit of detail there about the farmers who are in the project. And we will hopefully build to there all of the results that we find through our collaborations and our research. So anyway, I will let Becky now start to talk about the really interesting results from the first round of sampling.
Thank you ever so much, Tom. So, yes, I've got the unenviable task of talking about everything that we've been doing in the last 9 months in 10 minutes. So the challenge is set, and what we're going to try and do is just give you a little bit of an overview of some of the testing and the analysis that we've been looking at and where we are now in terms of looking at what that's telling us and actually what are the indications that we're seeing moving forward in terms of being able to look at what the carbon baseline is across this cohort of farms, and then more importantly, what is the actual ability to change that through supporting the farmers and working with them over the next 5 years. So I suppose the background, Tom's given us a really good background in terms of what's happened with the project. And I suppose why we've been involved with it is that we've been really focusing on this idea of how we manage and measure soil carbon for about the last 6 or 7 years. At the Farm Carbon Toolkit, we're really, really passionate about providing practical tools and resources that farmers can use in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving business resilience, and a real understanding that improving soil health and carbon capture is a really key part of that. But what we found when we looked was that there was very little information about how we measure it, the potential for all these different practices to make a difference, and really trying to get some consistency. So really trying to understand how farmers do deliver that climate solution, but really trying to provide the data and evidence that allows us to see what is actually possible. And a key part of that is really understanding the impact of management. So understanding, as Tom says, how much carbon have we got stored there that obviously we want to look after, but then more importantly, especially when we start thinking about our ability to add to that, what are those management practices that make the difference, and how do we adopt those, and how do they work across different farming systems, soil type, and climatic conditions? So what we've been doing with Yeo Valley is really starting to understand what the baseline is across these cohort of farms. So getting a really in-depth understanding of carbon stocks, but also how that links to soil health. So we're measuring a range of different parameters. And instead of doing this on a sort of sample of fields, we're doing this across every field on the farm. So we get a really, really good understanding in terms of what's happening, which we can then overlay information about soil type, historic management of those fields, so we can start to sort of pull out why some of these fields might be different, and more importantly, what we can do as we move forward. And so although we're at the start of this project in terms of giving you the information on the baseline, the really key part of this is to support and work with these farmers to share best practice and to empower them to understand what the impact of these different changes will be over time. So in terms of what we've actually been doing, we've been down a lot of holes for the last 9 months, but really looking in terms of the soil sampling, we've been sampling, as I just said, every field on every farm. And they've been being analysed for soil organic matter, soil organic carbon, and nutrients. So all of those samples have gone off to the lab. They've all been done in a very robust way in terms of making sure that we can really see the benefits of that. But alongside that, we've also been looking at those soil health measures. So actually those measures that we can start to see when we dig holes. So looking at worms and aggregates and structure. So really starting to be able to understand the impact of what we can do and what we see day to day, and what that means in terms of what that looks like with our carbon content. So we've been doing all of these different things. All of the sample points have been logged. They've all been logged on a QGIS system, which means that when we go back and we resample, we're visiting the same points, and we're trying to make it as robust as we possibly can do. And then in terms of our soil health metrics, looking at structure, worms, aggregates, infiltration, to really start to understand how these proxy measures that we can look at link into what's happening in terms of existing carbon stock and potential to improve that. And then each of the farms that are involved, they get their results back, and then we have a conversation with them in terms of looking at, is there anything that surprised them, and then really using that as a starting point in terms of what we can then do next. So that's what we've been doing. And again, if anybody has got any more questions about our methodologies and all the different tests that we've been doing, I'm around afterwards, and we have a stand over there, so please do come along and talk to us. But let's get to the interesting bit then, in terms of what's happening with the results. And I suppose the caveat at this point is that this is a long-term project. And what's really exciting with this work that we're doing with Yeo Valley is that we're not just looking at this over a 1-year time period. We've actually got this ability to start to look at things over the longer term, so that we can take our baselines now and then work with the farmers and see what that's providing as we move forward. So in terms of number of fields and what we've been doing, as I say, we've got 25 farms involved in this project, and so far we've sampled 636 fields, just over 3,600 hectares. It's about almost 6,500 bags of soil, so lots, and about just under 10,000 points that have been sampled. And for anybody that gets excited about this sort of stuff, it's almost 2,000 holes that we've been digging. So we've been quite busy. In terms of what are the crops that have been growing in these fields, we can see here that actually we've got a mix between permanent pasture, temporary grassland, and other sort of arable crops, some diverse swards that are there as well. But what's also really interesting is that we have got some farms that are also growing agroforestry and have got woodland areas that have also been included as part of this project. So we've got the complete range of all the different sort of types of crops and land uses that we might see across the cohort, which allows us to have a really good understanding about what's happening. And alongside that, we've also got a real diverse range of soil types, and that's allowed to be mapped over the top as well. So just in terms of soil carbon, we know that soil carbon is super important. This is not the audience that I need to explain why soil carbon is important. But again, thinking about how that links in with improved soil health, with improved soil resilience, and thinking about what we then do day to day, this is where the really exciting bit really starts to come in terms of what can we do as farmers and what is that delivering in terms of solutions. So within the reports that we're sending out, we've got percentage soil organic matter, we've got percentage soil organic carbon, but a really key part of what we're doing is also calculating our tons of carbon, so our carbon yield. so that we can start to understand not just what the percentage carbon is and think about our soil in a 2D format, but really start to consider our soil in that 3D format and look at how much carbon we can hold, and look at that not just in terms of where that carbon is, but actually how that is moving between those different soil horizons. And what we've also been able to do, thanks to the work that we've been doing through our Soil Carbon Project, is that we can also provide that benchmark for these farmers involved in this project in terms of how does that compare to our Soil Carbon Project, which we've been running over the last few years in partnership with Northwick Research, Duchy College, and the University of Plymouth. So, and because the lovely thing, we've done all of this sampling in the same way, we can provide that analysis and comparison. So, what are we looking at here? Now, this is our soil organic matter content. So remembering this is the first year, this is our baseline in terms of where we are. And we can see the different colours there. We can see, obviously, our Yeo Valley cohort, so the farmers that are involved in this project. We can see that we've got two different colours there. And that's because, unbeknownst to us at the start of the project, we realised that we had one farm that was essentially peat. And so if we were to include those in our averages, it was going to slightly skew our results. So I have been super critical, and the blue bars there are with the peats included, and the red bars are when we take that out to make it a little bit more comparison. But what we can see there is the yellow bars are our Soil Carbon Project cohort. Okay, so that's all of our 100 farms that have been involved in our Soil Carbon Project. So what we can start to see here is that we can see that our organic dairy farmers, even when we adjust them, are performing really well. But also, we need to think about, well, what can we do? What's the impact of soil type? And really starting to put this in context in terms of our farm conditions and our soil types. So it's really important to look at those benchmarks that are out there in terms of understanding where you are currently and using that as an ability to see what your scope is. But what's been really interesting through this project is that we're starting to see farms that potentially might already be at the high carbon, but are still pulling more carbon in. And it's really about looking at where that carbon is in the soil profile and starting to see that it's being pulled in those lower levels, which is really where some of our solutions really do lie. If we look at crop type, again, we can see here how that breaks up across the different types of crop. And I suppose the really interesting thing here is looking at the impact of permanent pasture compared to trees. And we can see here that actually the soils under permanent pasture are holding more carbon than those soils under woodland. And obviously this isn't taking account the carbon in the above ground biomass, but really just looking about our ability to value those permanent pasture fields in terms of a carbon stock, but also then thinking about how we can improve those managements as we go forward. Looking at our carbon yield data. So again, this is really interesting here, again on those adjusted fields, and this is our calculation in terms of our tonnes of carbon per hectare. We can see here that our Yeo Valley cohort are outperforming our Soil Carbon Project. And this is our Soil Carbon Project results in terms of what's happening. So this is a really good news story for our organic dairy farms in terms of their carbon stock. They've got good levels of carbon stock, and that level is outperforming what's happening on our Soil Carbon Project. And we can see that across our cohort of 25 farms, we're storing 672,000 tonnes of carbon. Not insubstantial. But what we're looking at, as I said at the beginning, it's not just about how much we've got, although we really want to protect that. It's about what the ability is to change that as we go forward. And with a caveat that obviously we are only at the start of this project, and a key part of our next activities is to support these farmers to help understand where they might be able to implement some of these practices so that we can start to see the benefits. But just some really interesting things that we've pulled out on a farm by farm level that hopefully just illustrates what I was just saying. So this is the impact of management is a really crucial part of that what next. Actually looking at what we've got currently, but more importantly, how we can actually make a difference in terms of what's happening with management. And as I say, we're currently doing a load of analysis on that data, but just pulling out a couple of case studies, which really start to showcase what hopefully will be spoken about as we go down the panel. So this is one in terms of the importance of increased diversity. Now, we all know the theory. What's above ground in terms of the diversity of plants, we're mirroring that in terms of what's happening below the ground. Now, this is one of our farms that we're working with where they've got a split field trial. Half of the field is perennial ryegrass and white clover. The other half has been sown to a diverse mix, same soil type, everything in terms of previous rotation. Both lays were established in 2019, and then they've been grazed in terms of 2020 and 21. Now, the really interesting bit to look at here is actually what's happening in terms of the soil organic matter in the middle depth. So again, if we then think about our ability for these farms to continue to sequester carbon, there's not much difference in the top, but actually where we started to get those increasing rootings and more biological activity, suddenly we're starting to see those diverse mixes blow it out of the water. So what else have we got? Now, one of the big things we have lots of discussion about is, well, actually, within an organic system, quite often there's that disturbance in terms of ploughing. So again, that's the evil. What do we see here? Well, actually, on this farm, we've got 2 fields, again, same soil type. One's a perennial ryegrass white clover lay, and then one's been reseeded after a ploughing event with a herbal lay in 2016. Again, really interesting in terms of seeing, even with that ploughing event, we're still starting to see that carbon being drawn down into those lower soil depths. Really interesting. And again, these are things that we will be following through as we get to analyse more of the data as it starts to come in. But these are really encouraging first steps. The other really important thing is not just to look at the percentages, but also start to look at the total tonnes in terms of that's our additional tonnes that we've pulled in through these practices. Also, we've done a lot of soil health. We've counted a lot of worms, over 15,000 of them. Really important soil health indicator and something which we will continue to look at both in terms of the classification of worms and the total numbers and the impact of those different practices on that biological activity. So where are we going next? As I say, we're only at the end of year 1 of this project and we're already finding some absolutely fantastic and exciting results. So really it's going to be really exciting as we move forward. But the baselining is continuing. So we've done half of the fields. We're doing the other half of the fields as we go through the rest of this year. And then really starting to be able to analyse the impact of that current management and then working with the farmers and supporting them to actually help understand what they mean for them and what they can do differently, which is the really crucial next bit. And really trying to provide that evidence which empowers our farmers to really start to make those changes that make a difference. So I will stop waffling now, but I would just like to say before I finish, thank you ever so much to our absolutely fantastic farmers that are involved in this project. They've been an absolute source of inspiration and they've let us come and dig multiple soils and wander around with augers and buckets. But also thank you ever so much to Yeo Valley, because this project is really going to show us some really exciting results that will help provide the evidence that shows that farmers are part of that climate solution. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Becky. Becky has spent about 9 months herding bags of soil around the country, and it's been a pretty mammoth effort, and we've been really impressed. But, it was very exciting in the last couple of weeks to get this download of the first set of results. I think we all kind of know that in organic agriculture, we've been working for a long time to foster natural fertility and work with the soil, but it's really kind of nice to see that borne out by the first results coming in, and to see that in some of those case studies, the things which we are told about perhaps more in an international context as being the things which might help are working within the UK context on UK farms. And on that basis, I'm going to hand over to Tom and Sophie to talk a bit about what they're doing.
Hello, everyone. Just like to say, Becky, it's a pleasure working with you. We didn't even realise you were there half the time. It's been great. We're Tom and Sophie Gregory. We're first generation, actually, dairy farmers on the Dorset-Devon border. I met Tom quite young, and he always wanted to go back into dairy farming after his dad had come out of dairy farming, and I thought he was completely mad. But in 2014, we took on a tenancy with another local organic farmer on the Sabra estate, and we put the farm straight into organic conversion and started selling milk to Arla in 2014. So what does the farm look like now? So we're 360 cows on a split block calving. So we calve twice a year, 260 in the spring and then 100 in the autumn. We're across 900 acres and we're very low input, low output. So I think people think we're a bit mad when I say that we're at 5,500 litres and we wouldn't want any more than that. That's what our cows do. We do a lot of walking with the cows as our whole farm's tracked. So our biggest thing is we want to produce milk from grass in a sustainable, social and environmental way. And I suppose my real focus on the business, as well as doing a lot of the milking and rearing the young stock, is what social impact we're having as a business. We've got a very open gate policy. So we have anyone from, at the moment, we've got 3 vet students with us who we're trying to bring along on the regen journey, just trying to open the gate and have people see what we're doing, because I think people learn from doing. I'm just going to press the next one. So here we've got clover cows. So I've got a wooden cow that I take into schools with me, which I think is really important. We're trying to get the next generation in, and not only as people to work on the farm, but also to buy dairy in the future and to come along on the journey. And then in the middle there, we've sort of Open Farm Sunday, went to help with a friend's Open Farm Sunday and do tractor trails around the farm. And we've always got an apprentice training with us. So, yeah, we're really involved in the local community as well, and that everyone knows they can come in and have a look what we're doing at any point, because I really feel like we learn from each other. So 4 years ago, we started looking at doing soil samples and things, and we were actually quite shocked. We thought that being organic was going to make our soil great, and actually some of our results were declining. So it's time to look at dairy farming in a different way, which is, where we were 4 years ago. So I'll let Tom take over now.
Thanks very much. So my job is to sort of convert what some of the theory is to what we're doing actually on farm. So finding the solutions through regenerative practices is what I'm going to try and talk about. And one of the things we were doing was identifying the limitations of the way we were managing the farm and the limitations that was having on soil and how that was limiting production. One of our main limiting factors as dairy farmers is grazable acres. So can we, with the same grazable acres, grow more grass? If we were to say we could grow 20% more grass by changing our practices, that means we could either keep 20% more cows, or 20% on organic terms would cover all our purchase costs, all our purchase feed costs. So if we could grow all our purchase feeds by changing the way we look at the soil or the way we graze the cows, that could have a huge increase in our profitability. And I think profitability is something that we need to speak more about in regenerative agriculture. So it's fine to talk about everything else, but at the bottom of this, it's all about, if we can't make money doing the things we're doing, if we can't make money, we're not going to convince the rest of the farmers to actually have a go and change the way they do it. So 3 things I'm going to talk about. The first one is mob grazing. About 4 years ago, we were finding it was our second round of soil results, just standard conventional soil results. And also we measure all our grass on AgriNet. We're doing weekly grass walks, so we're getting some really good data on how the farm's performing. But we're starting to see some obvious fields weren't performing that well. So one of the things we decided to do was just give this one field a bit of a rest, and we were going to mob graze it. And we did that for 2 or 3 years. No real science to it, just having a go. And we took that field from producing 4.5 tons of dry matter a hectare to 8.5 tons of dry matter a hectare. And that field had no inputs. That we didn't put any slurry or any muck on that field. The only change was the way we grazed it. So that was quite powerful. But what I didn't have was any real data to prove that field's change was through the mob grazing. So what we're doing now is a big mob grazing trial as part of it's an innovative farmers field lab trial. So we've taken one of the fields in our farm. It's a 22-acre field, and it just so happens to have a track straight down through the middle. So we're using that track as a field break, and we're grazing one side of the field conventionally. So we're going in at 2,800 kilos of dry matter, coming out of 1,500 kilos of dry matter, and we're going to measure that on AgriNet. We're going to carry on applying a bit of slurry now and then. The other side, we are changing the practice, and we're going to mob graze that side. So far, that field has been grazed twice this season. The mob side, has been grazed twice this season. Once on our first rotation around the farm. That was done just like we would, because we need to get around the farm, just get everything going. And then we left that field for probably 60, 65 days. And we went in a cover of 5,500, which was well over my welly and over the quad tyre on the bike, on the quad bike, which was a bit daunting, because we had no idea if this is going to work. So cows go in the first time, milk's not dropped. So far, so good. Grass seems to be growing back. So we're really excited about this trial, and hopefully we can just prove what's going on. this is my idea of Mintoing. I didn't really want to go and buy some really expensive kit. I'm not sure if they would have been keen on me parking my piece of kit up here, though. It just needs a bit of finishing touches. So what we wanted to do was, we were like, right, okay, ploughing's bad. We understand this, right, so what do we do? And what we're seeing on our farm, we're all perennial ryegrass and white clover. I'm not going to go and plough up the whole farm, put herbal lays in, or do all that one time, or do the whole thing, the whole farm into a diverse sward, because we need to buy the seed, and again, we need to look at profitability. So how can we slowly get around the farm and turn it all into diverse lays? So we bought a set of spring tines, and we thought we'd have a go at just breaking up what we had. And what we were seeing was the white clover perennial ryegrass lay was fine, but after a few years, the white clover would die out and some wheatgrasses would come in. But the wheatgrasses seem to be shallow rooting and not strong. So what we're doing is going through these lays with the tines and the harrows to pull out the wheatgrass, and so we're probably pulling out 30 or 40% of the grass in these particular fields, and then we've gone behind with a direct drill and drilling the grasses in. So we're drilling plantain, sainfoin, red clover, white clover, and Thessalonians into a ryegrass lay. Compost. Nutrients on, we have two farms. The runoff farm, where our silage and heifers are, we are grazing all year round. So one thing we can't do is apply FYM, because there's never a chance for that FYM to rot down. And also, if we're looking at runoff and leaching, FYM maybe isn't the best product. You're applying the FYM, or traditionally you're applying the FYM in the autumn when nothing's growing, so you can give it time to break down. So we had to think of a way of how can we get nutrients onto our farm in a way that works for us. So we've applied for a FIPL, Farming Protected Landscape grant, and we were lucky enough to get an 80% grant on a compost windrow turner. Unfortunately, everyone seems to be getting quite excited about compost, and there's now a 12-month waiting list for this machine to turn up. So we thought, right, get the welder out again. And we welded some doors on the back of a muck spreader to turn it into quite crude composter. But what it's allowing us to do is prove the concept. So we're getting FYM, we're turning FYM, and we're creating compost. We're seeing the piles heat up, and we're seeing the piles decrease in size. Hopefully, after second cut this year, we're going to be putting this compost in. So this is a revelation for us. We're able to put farm-yard manure-based product onto a growing crop in the middle of the summer. So we're adding nutrients when we want the nutrients, and we're also adding a much more stable nutrient. The last thing I wanted to talk about, I haven't got any slides on this, was actually just education. I'm a real believer in education, and to learn about this, we're doing a soil course also funded by FIPL on learning how to compost, so we can do all that. And I think what the industry needs to stop doing is, rather than paying a consultant to tell you what to do, we need to be investing in ourselves to educate ourselves for the long-term gain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom and Sophie. And now Claire's going to talk to us. And what we tried to put together here on this panel was some thoughts on soil and the kind of laboratory results that we've been getting, and the very detailed analysis we've done on 25 of our supplier farms. And then for Tom and Sophie to talk about that in practice. But what I sort of was hoping Claire would talk about is a little bit about the regen journey, and how this is about a mindset as much as laboratory results, and about some of the indicators that farmers can use themselves without needing to send off laboratory tests to look at their soils, to perhaps try and puzzle out what's going on in the way that Tom has looked at his soils and tried to address the bottlenecks that he perceives he has. So thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And I've got the difficult act of following everybody else, and I've also been told that I'm sitting right in front of the pole, so I have to just awkwardly itch up to you, Tom, and stand here so that the camera can see me, apparently. So that's why I'm moving position. So this Tom, asked me, said, "Can you do mindset and measures?" And I was like, yeah, maybe in 10 minutes we can cover that off. But then actually I thought about it and I realised that in a way the two, I can tell that story, the two are actually quite linked. And so I decided, well, I can't do all of it in 10 minutes, so I'll pick one in particular. And so for me, that is water. So water is actually what changed things for me. It was what made me really think differently. And this is I didn't mention earlier, I worked for FAI Farms and for 3 or 4 years ran the 1,200-acre beef and sheep farm in Oxfordshire. And it was during that time that we kind of had this kind of regen. We decided we were going to go from organic to regen because a similar thing. We didn't do any testing, but we could just feel the soil didn't feel good. It didn't feel right. Couldn't really explain it. But, oh, sorry, yeah. Hang on. Sorry, I motioned. I was going to, yeah. Okay, fine. Right, I'm here. Okay, right. I'm not used to this. Anyway, as part of that, one of the reasons that I decided to look at the regenerative, because the same thing, we were organic, and it was like, well, surely we're doing everything that we possibly can. But the top left, the flooded picture, shows what the farm in Oxford looks like for pretty much most of the winter now. So 50% of the farm goes under every winter without fail, multiple times. It used to be about once every 10 years. Now it's every year, multiple times. So it's always the wettest winter on record. And then the next picture along with the cracks in the ground was the picture I took when I had my light bulb moment, because it was lambing time and 4 weeks previously, it had been underwater, and then we had cracks in the ground, and I was like, where the hell has all the water gone? And then, so then we started thinking about, well, how are we going to measure it? And that's where I'm going to talk about measurements. So we started doing infiltration rate measurements. And again, organic, grassland farm, we must have perfect water infiltration. So I started banging some infiltration rings, the top picture, you can see at the end of the line, into the ground. And I realised that it was taking 45 minutes for half a litre of water. So one of these water bottles here, between 45 minutes and 8 hours for half a litre of water to infiltrate into our soil. And I was like, oh, right, okay. So when it rains, this water's not going in. It's just running off. And that was like a real light bulb moment for me. And so I think the one thing that I talk about and encourage people to do now is, if you do nothing else, do some infiltration rate tests on your fields and see what that brings. People always want to know what's good, what's bad, what are you looking for? I think that we're just looking for, we aren't comparing ourselves with anybody else. We're just looking for, is it improving, or where is it different? And often it's quite surprising where you expect it to be, good or bad or otherwise. We use an app called Soil Mentor. I think they're here today. I found it really useful. And as time goes on, I'm doing more and more of the different measures on there. The basal transect one is very good. And all of them, none of them are kind of designed to give an absolute result, like this is good, this is bad, you are better than your neighbour or worse than your neighbour. This is just about providing a number of different lenses in which to view our farm and view our fields. And I think that's part of the mindset shift as well. We're often looking for absolute chemistry results. I have an X amount NPK test result, but we're kind of realising now that we've chased the kind of soil chemistry, and actually we need to be looking at soil in a way of biology. It's a living thing. It changes all the time. And we need to start figuring out how to understand some of that complexity. We'll never be able to define it necessarily and say, I have this exact number of this microbes or whatever, and they do this. It will constantly evolve. But by using different measures like infiltration rate, like basal transect, like rooting depth, Becky's talked about, those types of measures, we start to just build a picture, and it's a different way of viewing what we're doing. And it really helps on a regenerative journey, because all of these things are indicators of not just better soil health, but better kind of ecosystem processes, and that's what we're kind of, ultimately, we're all part of an ecosystem. We need to start living within it and realising our role within it, rather than trying to control it like we maybe have in the past, of which I was. I'm one of those annoying people that's a convert. I haven't always been a regen person, so now I bang on about it all the time, but I was definitely come from a traditional agricultural background. And just to talk about water a little bit more, the picture at the bottom is looks a bit like a harvested arable field. It's actually a grassland field, and that in Oxford is what most of our grazing looks like in the summer. So it just adds to our thinking about water, and actually the key to unlocking our productivity. To Tom's point, this isn't all about it's nice to do all the the stuff for the insects and everything. Actually, the biggest unlocker to our productivity is water, and if we could hold on to water and keep green grass growing through the summer, that's going to kind of be our sweet spot on our farm in Oxford. And so that's another reason for changing our management practices in order to hold on to more water. And then I just wanted to share this slide as part of that as well, as part of these conversations about what is regen and how do we define it, and where do we put ourselves right now. Now, I'm not allowed to move over to the screen, but what we have is a kind of sliding scale from, depending on your terminology, degenerating through to regenerating, or reducing impact. I think what we're starting to look at in regenerative systems is what we're doing in regenerative systems. Not starting to look at is this concept of not just doing less bad. We're not just trying to reduce our emissions. We're not just trying to reduce something. We're actually trying to bring about systems that do good, and that's why a kind of looking for those positive regenerative outcomes, such as an increasing infiltration rate, increasing rooting depth, increasing carbon content at depth. Those things are all regenerative indicators, because ultimately there is we don't know, no end game yet. We're just trying to move ourselves up the scale. We're kind of down. We placed ourselves sort of down the bottom end, even as an organic farm, in this kind of nature-friendly, making space for nature. But really, we haven't even achieved net zero on our farm yet, and so we haven't kind of got as good as we can be. So what we're constantly trying to do is just figure out there is no one path. We're just trying to work out how do we work our way up the scale? How do we learn a bit more? And I would totally agree with Tom's point about learning, and we often, as farmers, we often kind of resort to, I just want a new piece of kit, or I just want a new one thing or a new product to solve my problems. And actually we've got to kind of up our eco-literacy and start to understand nature and its complexity. So how do we best harness nature and work with it, rather than how do we control it and suppress it in order to grow what we want, where we want it to grow. So we need to understand, and in order to do that, a product or a thing or even a consultant can't necessarily tell us that. We can use, as a consultant, we can still use them. They are very good and helpful. But that's all right. Users in a way to help, not to make the decisions. That's often, what do I do about this? What mix do I sow? What about this? What should I plant here? What should I do? It's about us, kind of consultants, supporting the eco-literacy and upping of understanding. For farmers to be able to take that on. And that's maybe a change as well, a bit of a mindset shift in the way that the things are currently structured, and around maybe veterinary or agronomy can often be product linked, and just to start to think about that, and how do we use those people in different ways? How do we have our vets come to farm and we pay them for their time to work with us and figure out how they're going to support us on our regen journeys, and accept that we're going to pay them for their time. We're not thinking, bloody vets are really expensive. Actually think about those people out there in a different way. We did that a few years ago, and our vets were like, "You are nuts." But as time went on, it was really interesting to have them as part of the process, because then they hear what we're doing, then they went to other farms, and then they're like, oh, okay, and now they're really on board and like really supporting it as they're seeing the rise of everything come up. So that would be part of my kind of the way we think about what we're doing. There's two elements to regenerative. One is about the practices and the things we do differently, mob grazing versus rotational grazing, or whatever that might be. And then there is the mindset shift. And sometimes we just pick off a couple of practices that we're going to do differently. But often what happens is we pick off a few practices and then we start to think a bit differently. So here is the end of my practices and mindset shift speech.
Thank you very much, Claire, and everyone else on the panel. Really interesting talks. And, I've been spending quite a bit of time in the last 12 months or so going around talking to farmers in our network, dairy farmers and non-dairy farmers. And it's just interesting to see this transition that Claire's talking about beginning to happen. There's loads of levers to pull in terms of the kind of work that Becky does in getting people very engaged and educated in how to look at their soil and what the measurements to take are. And then there's also huge amounts of information online in various groups about what works, what might work, what doesn't, what people are trying. I just think it's very interesting for the organic dairy sector. I think regen dairy is thought of as being a bit of a tough nut to crack, but I think we have quite a lot of experience in the organic dairy sector of occupying, towards the centre or the right-hand side of that scale in the practice that we've been carrying out for the last 20 years. And as we've heard, there's exciting kind of areas for investigation for tipping the scale even further that way. So on that basis, we're done with our talk. Was there any questions that anybody would like to put to the panel? Have we got a microphone for? Brilliant.
Patrick Holden, brilliant presentations. So much to learn from what you've been doing. Two questions. The first is, my organisation, the Sustainable Food Trust, is trying to persuade DEFRA and the devolved administrations to make measuring sustainability impacts a condition of entering into the post-Brexit schemes. Are you mindful of the need to harmonise the way that you're measuring them? And would it be possible to not have an army of scientists doing it? In other words, could it be within the bounds of cost possibility for farmers to do this on their own? That's one question. Second question is, are you factoring in the shadow acreage if the farmers are using grain? Because I think there are a lot of people out there who, in the grassland science community, who say that you can't build soil carbon after a certain time in grassland, permanent or temporary, and that's stopping the Climate Change Committee from factoring in soil carbon sequestration into their calculations. But those grassland scientists are going to look at what these presentations are saying, well, actually, the farmers are buying in concentrates, they're not factoring in the shadow acreage.
In terms of carbon footprinting, and the carbon footprint that we've carried out for our brand, those ghost acres, shadow acres, are factored in as well as they can be, or that's probably not the right way of putting it, but they try to account for them in the calculation. Effectively, we have used the ISO standard international kind of protocol for carrying out that assessment, which uses whatever data they can scavenge for that for those inputs, making assumptions about transport and farming systems. It's probably not massively accurate, and they tend to go to sort of worst case scenario in that case for the figures that they use. And so what we've tried to do is a by the book approach to that to give us the target, I guess. And if that is improved, that target may fall. If new information comes to light on those ghost acres, that will be added into that system. And so I suppose we'll all benefit from managing those things out of our systems. And within our farming, that's one of the areas for trial that we are carrying out is around increasing our own protein production, because for organic dairy, though we're grass-based and it's in relatively small amounts, it certainly in terms of carbon impact, those imported feeds carry a very significant carbon debt with them. In terms of harmonised matrix, I've seen the SFT tool, and it's really interesting, and I think you're doing a fab job of trying to get all this stuff into scope. I think we've come at things with the point of view that we've tried to, at least in this first phase, engage with experts in individual fields, and I think we've focused on carbon. There was a flurry of kind of information around carbon tunnel vision recently online, and I think we have focused very closely on carbon because we consider it to be such a kind of important subject from a consumer point of view that we need to get under control. But certainly bringing in the other holistic measures of what a regenerative system could output is going to be very important, and finding ways to do that is there as well. Does anybody else want to add anything there.
I just wanted to say on the consistency of metrics, when we started the soil carbon project, it really started from farmers saying, I don't know what to measure, and there's so many different things. So, within our project, we've been very, very open and transparent in terms of these are the methodologies that we're using. Join the project. If you can't join the project because we're full, we'll send you our protocols, because I think we're never going to move this agenda forward unless we are very open and transparent. And I think a really key point of what we're doing, especially within this project and the wider soil carbon project, is yes, we're doing the analysis, and obviously within the Yeo Valley project, we're doing a lot of analysis in a lot of fields. But alongside that, one of our key aspirations was to also look at those proxy health measures. So the infiltration rates that Claire's talking about, we've got those on all of the fields. We've got aggregate stability, we've got soil structure, we've got worms. So actually, and one of the key points of that was to see whether we could find a relationship between those proxy health measures and carbon. So if you don't want to go to the absolute accurate level, these are the ones that are indicating that you're moving in the right direction. And I think the more that we can provide education, tools, resources to help farmers more intimately understand what's happening in their soil and find those indicators that work for them, then we can really start to make this change happen. Because yes, there's always going to need to be a level of laboratory analysis. We're never going to get away from that. But as I say, if we can empower ourselves to understand what the right tools are, specifically within the soil bit, that actually we can use, and consistency across. That's the lovely thing with this project, because we're doing so many fields. We've got that really good data set to be able to really show what works. And by comparing that with our soil carbon project database, we've got the start. Now, we don't have all the answers. I'm not saying that, but we're at least starting to ask the question. And the other really important thing is that we're doing that on farm. We're not doing it in a lab. We're not doing it in a greenhouse. We're actually doing it in real farming businesses that are exposed to the weather, prices, everything else going on, so we can actually see what works.
Great. All right, I've just had the 5-minute flag, so let's get some quick questions in.
Ben Makowiecki from Lloyds Bank. I know that Baroness Rock is looking at how tenants can be involved in sustainable regenerative farming and the new subsidy schemes. Sophie and Tom, I just wondered what challenges and support you've had from your landlord in your transition.
Yeah, so Baroness Kate actually came to speak to us recently, and she's really inspiring. We're very lucky to have her on board. I think for us it's of length of tenancy, because as all of you will know, these decisions we're making are going to impact sort of 5 years down the line. So having a good length of tenancy is so important to us. And getting your landlord on board that the fields aren't going to look tidy like they used to, and the hedgerows are going to be a bit overgrown, but that's, for the better of nature, is really key. We've got 2 different very supportive landlords, and we're very lucky, but bringing them along on the journey is pretty key to going forward. But length of tenancy for us would be the biggest thing, to be able to make these changes and to see the real impact of them.
And also, some landlords the tenants might not work directly with, and if there's land agents in between the tenant farmer and the owner, I think it's really important that the land agent understands the benefits of what we're trying to achieve. So we might not want to offer the highest rent, but if they can see the big picture of what we're doing in the local community and on farm. I went to see a farm a couple of months ago, and the agent said, this farm has been farmed in good heart. There had been no animals on that farm for 7 months, and there was still cow poo in the fields. So I disagreed.
Hi, Rebecca Mayhew, dairy farmer in Norfolk. Just a very quick question, probably for Tom, actually, about testing and all this analysis you're doing, and linking it back to something Patrick said about feed for cattle. So we're pasture-fed. With all the testing that you're doing, bearing in mind that the volume, because we're very small, so testing us would be a little bit on the wacky side of the scale, possibly, or certainly the outside of the scale. Nutrient testing of the product is key. Are you looking at that?
As I think I said, we've focused very much on carbon for probably the last 3 years. If there's a sort of 3-legged stool of this regen thing, then I guess it's soil health, biodiversity, and nutrition. But it is something that we're very interested in, but it's a very early stage part of the work at the moment. Initially, our project was called the Yeo Valley Soil Carbon Project, and we changed that title to to leave it a bit more open-ended so that we can bring in more of this stuff. But I would say we don't really have any conclusions on that side of thing yet. It is something that we consider very important. And, you know, the top line principle we feel is that we're about producing natural, healthy food and understanding the impacts of doing that, and that food should be minimally processed and nutrient dense. And we'll do the work of unpicking all of that in subsequent years as we kind of develop the headspace and we understand everything that's going on the farms and in the soil as well.
Yeah, James Burgoyne. The big question I sort of had listening to you all is what's the end game here? Because soil health in itself, obviously a good thing, and the audience will like that. But you know, it's a question of bottom line and profitability. Now, the part of that is cost, but it could also be on the branding side. Seems to me that the big game changer would be carbon neutral dairy products, for example. The problem with regen is that no one quite knows what it means, and it can mean anything to anybody. Organic's got the premium for what reason I've never quite understood, but that's capture the public imagination. But this seems to actually do something on the cost side and potentially on the premium side. So I just trying to work out where, you know, if it's profitable, it's going to be sustainable, and it can't be sustainable unless it's profitable. So where is that going to kick in?
Well, I think on the very top line, we have to okay, time's up. We have to put ourselves in a position where we can represent the farming system that our food is coming from to our customers in a robust way for a number of reasons. To be able to talk to them about trends which are coming down the line, like carbon and biodiversity loss and probably human health in the future. But also to be, you know, where messaging is becoming very binary around alternative products and things like that, and oversimplified. We effectively, when we started to look at carbon, there's lots of good stories out there, but there wasn't a huge amount of data to back up the UK context. And so we decided we had to get off the fence and work with Becky at getting this soil out of the ground so that, as I was saying at the beginning, at the moment there's no methodology to put, for a brand like ours, to put carbon removal into the soil on the carbon balance sheet and create a product claim about the carbon intensity of that product. But we've fully understood our supply chain and our the carbon footprint of our brand, and we are working to understand, though it's a very long-term thing, the actual flux of carbon in and out of the land when those products are produced, so that in the future, hopefully, those two things can come together to form a product claim or a brand position on carbon, particularly. But I don't know, Becky, if you want to talk about farm resilience and the way that, you know, that sort of thing comes into play with it.
Absolutely. So I think, yeah, obviously in terms of how that fits into marketing, all that sort of stuff, obviously that is an ever-evolving thing. And I suppose one of the really key things from having this brilliant data source is we can actually start to understand what's possible. But for us, very much coming at it from a farmer perspective, it's about understanding, by implementing some of these practices, what does it do, yes, to soil health, but what does it also do to business resilience? And actually, as we start to, you know, talking about what Clare was saying about actually the ability of our soils to hold onto the water, the ability of our soils to cycle nutrients, to provide that ecosystem where all of that biology will thrive, we know that that will also have benefits in terms of how your farm performs. And a key part of some of the work that we do, both within this project and outside of that, is starting to understand how that does impact on financial performance, on margins, all these other sort of things, because ultimately we can provide that information that showcases that soil is the foundation and that everything will flow from that soil. But in terms of being able to see that it's a solution for the climate, for the individual farm business and for society as a whole, it's about really trying to pull all these different sets of metrics together to really start to provide that evidence.
Okay, I think we're about to be kicked off the stage, but thank you.